What of thinking? We find here that thought is an attribute that belongs to us. It alone cannot be separated from us. You are, you exist, that is certain. But how often? Just when you think. For it might possibly be the case if you ceased entirely to think, that you should likewise cease altogether to exist. Thinking about existence and being logical without pre-assumptions leads us to the dark conclusion of nihilism, a life of despair and devoid of meaning. To counter this problem, we must realize the power of our will, that we can choose to interpret the same life with our own personal constructed meaning. First, however, we must realize there is a problem. We've been fed without question beliefs and convictions ever since we were kids, and we've lived within their safety peacefully and blissfully. Let us abandon these convictions for a moment while we begin our intellectual journey. To understand how existence may be a burden, let's first note that we had no choice in whether to exist or not. We did not will to exist, we only became aware afterwards. We need to realize that while existing and awake, we have to be conscious and aware. Be it while spending hours on a bus, going through a dull day, or celebrating a friend's birthday. You have to be aware. You cannot fast forward or skip being conscious of what's happening, and you cannot cease temporarily to exist. You must experience the flow of time. While all this may seem normal, what is important to note here is that you had no choice. In addition, we find that this existence has but one absolute truth, that it is temporary. As Schopenhauer says in his article, The Emptiness of Existence, a man to his astonishment all at once becomes conscious of existing after having been in a state of non-existence for many thousands of years, when, presently again, he returns to a state of non-existence for an equally long time. What objective meaning could a person possibly find in his few years of existence before he, everybody, and everything return to nothing? Nothing will last. Nothing we do will last, and nothing could possibly last. There is not even the hope for that. What's more, even while we exist, whatever we do is desperately insignificant. We live on an average rocky planet, orbiting an average star on the outer region of an average galaxy. Our planet is hopelessly negligible when compared to the size of the sun, let alone this vast universe. A more encompassing description, we almost do not exist. This belief of lack of meaning or purpose for existence is what is called nihilism. Abandoning the notion of absolute meaning, however, isn't all negative. In fact, it offers us some liberations, among which is a redefinition of normality. We see how absurd are all norms, traditions, and social interactions. Sartre in his novel Nausea describes such a moment when the veil is torn away. The character later describes this incident by saying, and suddenly, the veil is torn away. I have understood. I have seen. To extrapolate on this thought, think of what you would normally call an evening dinner with my spouse. Under such a description, it all seems fairly logical, but a Sartrean view would strip away the surface pretenses and expose the deep strangeness beneath. Dinner is then basically waiting for the rock you're on to spin away from the fusion reactor it was facing, to sit at chunks of chopped up trees, putting pieces of dead plants and animals in your mouth, while another mammal whom you occasionally have sex with is doing the same. Sartre believes that viewing the world this way is incredibly liberating. Nothing around us is really normal, and so we do not have to conform to acting normally. Apart from nihilism, another position one can take is that of the existentialist. The existentialist believes in the lack of an inherent objective meaning as the nihilist. However, instead of living in purposeless despair, he constructs his own subjective purpose. It is important to note that the existentialist does not follow herds and indulge himself in widespread beliefs. For him that would be absurd. Instead, he constructs his own personal purposeful life on his own. A story that encapsulates the existential philosophy is the myth of Sisyphus. The myth describes finding meaning in the absurd in a very poetic way. In ancient Greece, Sisyphus was the king of court and one of the wisest mortals. However, in the afterlife, he is condemned by the gods to spend eternity repeatedly rolling a rock to the top of a mountain, which will fall back down once it reaches the summit. They had thought that there is no more dreadful punishment than futile and hopeless labor. As to Sisyphus in his torment, one can imagine him with his face pressed against the rock, feet pivoted on the ground and arms straining to push the stone upwards. Upon reaching the summit after a long tedious journey, Sisyphus watches for moments as the stone rolls back down, that makes the trip downhill. Camus writes on this particular period, "It is during that return, that pause, that Sisyphus interests me. A face that toils so close to stones is already stone itself. I see that man going back down with a heavy yet measured step toward the torment of which he will never know the end. That tower like a breathing space which retains as surely as his suffering, that is the hour of consciousness." To Camus, it is not the torture itself, but conscious awareness of it that makes the myth tragic. Sisyphus knows the whole extent of his torment. It's what he thinks of during the descent. Much like how the labourer of today works every day in his life at the same tasks, and his fate is no less absurd. However, it is only tragic when he becomes conscious. At the same time, Sisyphus' awareness is his salvation. He is the absurd hero trapped within the machinery of fate in a meaningless world, yet somehow able to overcome it. Although he cannot change the circumstance or the inherent meaninglessness of the world he is in, he can still choose how to interpret it. He can take hold of it and create his own meaning. This is how Sisyphus overcomes his rock. As Camus says, at each of those moments when he leaves the heights and gradually sinks toward the layers of the gods, he is superior to his fate. He is stronger than his rock. All Sisyphus' silent joy is contained therein. His fate belongs to him. His rock is his thing. At the end, Sisyphus can create his own meaning through the suffering itself. He needs not fall into despair. The struggle itself towards the heights is enough to fill the man's heart. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. Camus acknowledges the world's absurdness and indifference towards us, but he urges us to be absurd heroes, who live with dignity in the face of absurdity, who rebel against and transcend the world's indifference. And here, our intellectual journey comes to an end.